I spoke a word, you were seen over me. You have been so good to me. For I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so kind to me. Holy, overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. I was your foe, still your love offered me. You have been so good to me. When I felt no worth, you made it all for me. You have been so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Sing that again, there's no shadow. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, for us to sing about the praise of your name, for us to sing about the glory of you coming as a child, living a perfect life, and giving that life for us, so that we might experience your love, so that we might worship you today. In your name. Sing this again one more time. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Amen. You may be seated.
I invite you to open your Bibles to 2 Samuel chapter 6. This is where we're going to be. We're continuing our study on the life of David. David was a man after God's own heart. He was chasing after God. Excuse me. So, in chasing after God, he found fear. Now, that's not something we generally want to find. Generally, I would rather stay away from fear. I don't like being scared. Most of us don't. Anyone here like being scared? I mean, just really, really scared. So I was curious. I was just doing, some impromptu research this week and asking different people how they responded to fear. What was their typical response to fear? And I asked Philip, and I got to tell you, we need to pray for Philip. He does not have a good response to fear. Because immediately he said, "Oh, no, when I'm afraid, my first response, I get defensive and I want to hit." There's been a couple times where I thought I was going to hit Sarah. And I'm telling you, if he did, it would not end well for him. I am fully convinced that Sarah can take you. And fear is a natural thing that we have, but we can respond wrong to fear. And the reality is, what he expressed, though, is part of that wrong response that we can have to fear. Some people hide when they get afraid. They want to withdraw. Some people immediately they want to defend themselves, and some people want to attack. And when you get afraid, you want to attack. And the reality is, all of these are responses that are in the flesh. It's just a human, fleshly response to something that is normal, fear. We're all going to have at different times over different things, and that in the flesh, when we have fear, that it's the flesh because you're trying to control it, or it's creating anxiety in you, and so Philip in trying to attack, because I said, "So what happened?" He says, "Well, Sarah scares me sometimes." And that actually made sense to me. She scares me sometimes, and I'm not even married to her. But the reality is there's that. Excuse me. Could you give me some water, please? Please, sir. I got that cough just right there that wants to come out, and I hate being mic'd when that happens. It's not going to be pleasant. But the. All right, out of the water. It may come back. All right, now we're back. Where was I? The fleshly response to fear, to control it, and that's what he's doing when he's going to attack. What's he trying to do? I'm trying to take control of the situation. This situation scares me, and I feel like I need to control it, so I'm going to attack. Or I'm going to defend myself. Why? Because I need to control the situation, and I'm afraid that there's something that's going to happen to me, and I've got to be ready to defend myself in that situation. Or it can be anxiety, and anxiety, that can have, thank you, sir. Anxiety can cause us to hide. It can cause us to withdraw and want to curl up in a little ball and try to keep safe, but at the same time, you don't feel safe. When you're hiding from something, the reality is the fear tends to grow when you're hiding. And the anxiety tends to grow when you're hiding. Oh no, what's going to happen if I'm and you don't have any confidence in that when you're hiding or running. And it is still trying to control the situation, to avoid it. If I can avoid it, that allows me to be in control. Those are all responses from the flesh. Or we can just respond in the spirit that God has given us. And it's not a spirit of fear that would respond with trying to control it or trying to respond in our anxiety. If we're responding from what God has given us, we're going to respond in faith and wisdom. Faith and wisdom. Those are the things that come from having a relationship with God. And the difference. We have different fears in our life. And we see, sometimes we can have fear from a person. So Philip's afraid of Sarah. And see how irrational that fear has made him? Oh, I've got to control this situation. And we know Sarah controls you. And there's nothing you can do about it. No. It's not that. But there can be that kind of fear. I'm afraid of a person. I'm afraid of this. But the reality is, isn't the worst kind of fear being afraid for a person? I gotta tell you, not many people scare me. I mean, maybe that's because I ain't got a sense enough to be afraid sometimes. But the reality is, I get afraid for people. I get afraid. Sarah. She's gone, and she's got family down there. Oh, no, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. You take your baby girl and you feel this need to protect her. This need that every moment of her life, I have felt this need to protect her. And I got to drop her off 1,200 miles away from me, and I got to be okay with that. There's a part of that scares me. There's a part of that is like, whoa. Now, here's what happens. If I respond in the flesh, which is I got to control the situation, or anxiety is going to take over, you know what? I'm not going to drop her off 1,200 miles away for her to go to college. Even though she's prayed about it, she made in her college selection. We were very proud of the process that she went through, and it was a spiritual decision. And we trusted that spiritual decision, and we spent time in prayer with her over that spiritual decision. And fear's telling me, though, don't let her go. And I still face that fear all the time. And almost every day, there's that when I'm in my office every morning, and we have this routine. And especially this is the school year's going on. And the reality is, I should be going and making sure that she's up and getting ready for school. I should be hearing her come down the stairs. And that thought goes through my mind almost every single morning. I want her to be there. Why? Because I can protect her there. She's in the school she's at, they don't have co-ed dorms, and so I don't have to worry about that. But there's still guys on that campus, and it's like they need to know. It's like they need to know how scary Sarah's dad is, because I fear for her. When she's had a bad day, everything within me wants to go to her, or better yet, bring her home. That's fear. And it's normal. I got to make sure my response isn't in the flesh, but that my response is this fear which God has created, which is natural to have. So I go and I drop her off with this belief. God loves my little girl more than I ever could. God will do a whole lot better job of protecting her, better than I will ever be able to protect her. And the best thing she can do isn't to live under my wing, but to live the life that God has created for her. And it's not easy. Because fear's always there. So this is fear, and this is real. What about the fear of God? Is it different? We like to look at it in a way that we say, yeah, it's different, because the fear of God, that's reverence. Okay, but sometimes we forget the fear part. There's a reverence in it, but it is. And so in the flesh, with a fear of God, they're again, it's the same things that happen. I have a fear of God, and I'm going to respond to that fear of God in the flesh, then I'm going to try to control that relationship with God, or I'm going to have anxiety over it. So I may hide from God, I may run from God, I may attempt to appease God by my own efforts, which is trying to control the situation, trying to control the relationship, trying to make sure that I'm the one, that God's pleased with what I'm doing, and so He should be happy, and He's appeased. It's kind of like, when we went to, I think it was our very first trip to Cambodia, and the electricity was out at the hotel in Siem Reap, and we come back, and most of the businesses have a God house out front, and there was a pig sitting on the God house that had been sacrificed. They had been killed and put there on the God house to appease the gods, to appease the evil spirits in hopes that the electricity would come back on. You know what that is? Fear. And here's the way I got to respond to it. Somehow I got to make the gods, the evil spirits, happy. I've got to appease them. And the reality is, if we respond in the flesh to God in our fear of God, and the reality is, if you don't have a little bit of trembling about you with God, then there is definitely a disconnect in who God is and who you believe that God is. Because the reality is, it ought not just be a little bit of trembling, it ought to be a whole lot of trembling. Because Satan and his followers, the demons, you know what? They believe in God, and you know what it says? They tremble. There ought to be part of that that says, well, wait a minute. Because God is God, there's part of that just creates a trembling in me. And so when we see this and we respond to that in the flesh, I got to go out of this trembling, out of this fear. I need to control the situation. And if I can't control the situation, then I become defensive. And then I start blaming God. And then I may attack God and I may deny God. And the reality is, all of these are just a wrong response to the fear that God exists. God is real and that He's sovereign. But if I respond to this fear of God, this trembling of God, in the spirit in which He's given me, then I trust Him. And that, because I trust Him, you know what I do? I obey. If I trust Him, I obey, and I'm not afraid to obey. There may be a fear associated with it, just like there's a fear in letting Sarah go, but the reality is, we let her go. Why? Because we believe wholeheartedly that's the right thing to do. And when I obey God, there may be things that I don't understand, but I need to do them anyway, even though they scare me. Why? Because I trust God. Does it make me fearful? Yes, but I trust God. And in that trust of God, I gain wisdom when I trust God. That right fear causes me to trust, and through that, then I gain this wisdom because I understand not how God is working. Because the reality is, there's a lot of times, there's still things where I have seen that trusting God was the right thing to do. I still cannot explain it fully, what God is trying to do. But you know what I can do? I can explain His love for me fully. I can tell you without a doubt that God loves me and that He always wants His best for me. And there's where the problem comes in sometimes. His best is not always what I want. And that creates conflict. And so we have to understand that the wisdom that we gain from trusting God isn't always to be able to explain the why of what God is doing or the why God had us do something in a particular way. It's the wisdom to understand God loves me. That's what I know. And I can trust Him. And I've gained this wisdom and this understanding from that. And when we do that, you know what happens? Then we start revering Him. Then that trembling turns to worship. That's the fear of the Lord. When trembling turns to worship. But it's that process that it has to go through. David wrote in Psalm 19, verse 9, he says, "The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." So David's given us his thoughts on the fear of the Lord in Psalm 19, and he says it's clean or it's pure. The fear of the Lord is always right. It's always right to fear the Lord. To have this natural fear of God is always right. It endures forever, and so it's always going to be right. And you want to know how you should respond to God? You ever want to know how you're supposed to respond to somebody? And the reality is, you are always supposed to respond to God in fear. With this sense of fear. But it doesn't have to be trembling if we're responding to it alone, if we're responding to it in the way that God has desired to reveal Himself to us. That fear becomes worship. We recognize who He is, and we submit ourselves to that. Part of the reason we're submitting ourselves, fear. Another part but that fear has caused us and led us to honest worship because we recognize His love for us. And it's not His desire. Jesus didn't come to condemn the world. Jesus didn't come to condemn the world. The world was already condemned because of their unbelief. They would not acknowledge God. They had a fear of God. They responded in the flesh. Instead of allowing that fear to lead them humbly to God. Not only he says, is it clean, enduring forever, he says, because of this, he says, you start recognizing that the precepts of God are always true and right. That's when he says, when the rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether, you know what he's saying? Everything that God says is true. Everything that God says is true. We want to argue with it sometimes. We want to justify ourselves. And it comes back to, a lot of times, we just feel the need to believe that we are okay. That I'm not that bad. And you know why we can stand before others and say, I'm not that bad? Because you can find, no matter how bad you are, you can probably find someone who's worse than you. So I can justify myself. I've told you before, one of my mom's sayings, they're not worth shooting. And she said that to me, not worth shooting. harsh. Well, I had a healthy fear of my mother. And, but there's the reality is, there were people that were a lot worse than me. I could always find someone that was worse than me. There may be people here. You're worse than me. So the reality is, we start comparing ourselves with each other, and I can start justifying the choices in my life that I've made. I'm not that bad. I may not be perfect. I may not be great, but I'm not that bad. That's not responding in a fear, a true fear of God that leads me to understand that before God, and that's the only one who matters. It doesn't matter how I compare to you, and it doesn't matter how you compare to me. God measures us by the way in which He created us. And He created us to bring honor and glory to Him. And He is righteous, holy, just, full of love. And we talked about that last week. David found forgiveness. Who did he forgive? Saul, who made it his life mission to kill him. What do? Someone wrongs us. Well, we're going to hold it against them. How long? The rest of our lives. God created us to love our enemies. And when He's looking at us, He's not comparing how much love you have compared to your neighbor, someone else in your house. He's not comparing you to how much love you have compared with me. The reality is, He's saying your love falls short. Your righteousness falls short. That's the reason He says, there's none righteous, no, not one. We all fall short of the glory of God. And that ought to scare us. It ought to cause us to tremble. And this realization that we all know in the back of our minds, I might be able to compare myself to you and be okay. But that's not what God is doing. And no matter how much I argue with Him in the flesh, because of the fear that I have, no matter how much I want to control the situation, to convince God and try to manipulate God to accept me as I am, or to justify the choices I'm making in my life, the reality is, He is still God. So David, when we read Psalm 19, what we see is he worshiped. But when you study David's life, what you find out is he didn't always worship. David was just a man. We lift him up. He was someone that God used greatly. And we can learn a lot from David, and that's the reason we look to Scripture and study his life. But the reason David was the man that he is, or he was, is because he chased after God. He chased after God. And in that chasing after God, he discovered who it was that God, and the way that God was working in his life. And he wasn't always fearful of God in the way that he should have been. But in chasing after Him, he found how he should fear God. So in 2 Samuel chapter 6, we're going to look at this. David has just become king of all Israel. At first, Saul was the king. Saul died. We looked at that last week. And immediately David is made king over a portion of Israel. And he's ruling in Hebron. But the rest of Israel, the biggest portion land-wise of Israel, still not accepted him. And there's kind of this battle going on with some of Saul's family and those who served under Saul as to who would be in control. And all these things are going on. But through a course of events, now all of Israel has united under David. And David has then defeated the Jebusites, which was in Jerusalem. And at that point, he moves into Jerusalem. And so this is what has happened in David's life. Lots of success, lots of good things going on. And here's the problem with success. It tends to make us fearless. When we have a lot of success, you tend to be less afraid. Oh, yeah, I've done that, so no problem. I can do this. That's the reason when I've talked about it before. The reality is the body's getting older, but the mind remembers all the success I had. So when it comes down to it, I think I can get out there and play football with the young people. Why? Because I remember all the success I had playing football. I think I can get out there and play basketball. Why? Because I remember all the success I had. My mind works that way. It lies to us. Your mind lies to you all the time, especially when it comes to what your body can do once it gets older. But it creates a fearlessness. Oh, you don't have to be afraid of that. You don't have to be afraid of that. And that's what success does. Hey, I can do this. Why? Because I've had success at this. David had a lot of success. His life up to this point had been marred by, he had had some successes, but he had spent a big portion of his adult life, all of his adult life, had been spent running from Saul, hiding for his life, trying to preserve his life and the life of his family. And now he's king. Now everybody loves him. He's defeated every enemy that he faces. And he's becoming a little bit fearless. Man, I think David had to look at his life and say, man, God really loves me. Now I got to tell you, I think we all ought to be able to look at our lives and say, you know what? God loves me. And not just because of the blessings in your life. The reality is, you ought to be able to look even at the difficult things that have happened in your life, and maybe even the difficult things that are going on right now in your life, and you ought to be able to say, but I know God loves me. And even in this difficult situation, his hand is on me. And I don't know all that he's trying to do, but I know that he loves me. That's what I know. I think David had a sense of pride. The reality is we need the fear of God always. No matter what's going on in our life, no matter how much success you have, you still need this fear of God. And the first thing we're going to see here in 2 Samuel chapter 6 is what it looks like when we try living life without God, without a fear of God. When we try living life without a fear of God, we need it always. And the first thing we're going to see is a life without the fear of God isn't devoid of right desires. A life without the fear of God isn't devoid of right desires. Now here's what I mean by that. The reality is you can live a pretty good Christian life and still not have a fear of God. This is what it says as the chapter begins in verse 1 and 2. It says, David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Judah to bring up from there the Ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. So what has happened here, what we see here, but before Saul became king, 20 years before Saul became king, there was a battle between the Philistines and the Israelites, and at that time, Eli and his wicked sons were the judges over Israel, and Samuel's just getting ready to come into play. He's already been chosen by God to be that next one because God has rejected the sons of Eli because of their wickedness, and they take the ark in the battle, thinking, oh, yeah, as long as the ark's in front of us, we're good. And the reality is it's not a symbol of God that we need. The reality is it's God that we need. And they thought this symbol was going to save them. The Philistines captured the ark. They take it back as this trophy. They have it for 7 months. They first take it to Ashdod, and then all these terrible things start happening, and everybody's dying, and disease has hit land, and they're like, we got to get rid of this. And so they take it to Gath. They take it to one of their other cities. And the same thing starts happening. First Gath is like, oh yeah. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute, everybody's dying. Let's take it to Ekron. They take it to Ekron. Ekron's like, no, we heard what's going on. We don't want it. And then you have no choice. You got to take it. And then the same thing starts happening. People start dying. The land is cursed. And so they mounted it on a donkey and said, well, we'll know whether or not, we'll put it on this donkey, and if the donkey goes towards Israel, then we know that was the cause. But if it comes back to us, then we know that's not the cause. There's something else that's causing this. Well, the donkey goes towards Israel. It eventually ends up in the house of Abinadab in Kiriath Jearim, which is called Bel-Judah here in 2 Samuel chapter 6. And there they pick Abinadab and his sons to watch over it, to care for it, to protect it. But it's not back in the place where it was meant to be. It was in Shiloh before. That's the place where they were worshiping God. That's the place where the tabernacle was located at. That was the place that it was supposed to be, and never was supposed to be taken from the Holy of Holies unless God was moving them. And that was the only time it was supposed to be taken from that place, is when God was moving it. And so now they're taking it, they took it out, but they've taken it and they've set it there. And it stays there until Saul becomes king. It stays there the entire time that Samuel is judging Israel. It's about 20 more years. And it also stays there the entire time Saul also shows absolutely no interest in getting things back in order and getting the ark back to where it belongs and setting things up the way that God had always intended things to be set up. But we've seen that with Saul's life. Saul was all about himself. So David has a really good idea. Really good desire. You've heard me say this before. Life isn't about being right. It's about doing right. You can know all the answers, but if you don't respond correctly to life situations, it doesn't matter what you know. You're not going to stand before God one day and be given a test on your biblical knowledge. You study God's Word because in it, God reveals Himself to you. And in His revealing Himself to you, it creates a fear that causes us to serve Him. And if it doesn't, then all you're doing is gaining knowledge. We need to do right. And sometimes we can have a good idea based upon the knowledge that we have. But we can do it without seeking God. And this is David. He's like, man, we got to get the ark back. We need to get this all back the way it should be, the way God always intended. But he never stops to seek God and how God would have him to do that. That is a life without fear. When you're pushing ahead, even doing good things, when you think you can do good things without seeking God, the reality is you don't have an honest fear of God. An honest fear of God doesn't just keep me from doing bad things. It's even when I feel like I should be doing good things, that I ought to take the time to seek God and to understand what it is that He would have me to do and not make it about myself. So our knowledge of God is not the same as fear of God. And then he's going to go on, and what we're going to see is that good intentions in a life without fear of God will seek what is right in their own eyes. If you have good intentions, but you don't have a fear of God, then what you do, you're doing because it's right in your own eyes. That's what good intentions lead you to. Because here's what happened with David. He said, hey, got a great idea. Let's go get the ark. And so in verse 3 it says, and they carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God. And Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when it came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. I got to tell you, this is one of those stories, if you don't understand, if you don't have a knowledge of who God is, you're going to read this story and go, that's extreme. What's going on here, man? I mean, they're bringing in the ark, and if you look at it, look at all the good intentions here. They didn't just say, hey, somebody got a cart we can use? No, they got a new cart, which means that it had never been used before. So the implication is they freshly built this cart specifically for this reason. Why? Because this is the Ark of God, and God deserves our very best. Let's build a new cart. And then they pick good people. They go down to Abinadab and his sons, and they've been caring for the ark, and they're, hey, we're taking the ark back to Jerusalem, and so you've been doing this. You know the ark better than anybody else. God has honored you for taking care of the ark. You need to be a part of this. So they pick out good people to drive the cart. And then everybody's worshiping. All of Israel, David, they're singing praises to God. They're dancing before the Lord. Everything they're doing looks good until Uzzah dies. So what did they do wrong? Well, they followed after the sin of Cain. To believe that our good intentions ought to impress God, and if we have good intentions, that means we don't have to obey God. As long as my intentions are good, God is not concerned about my obedience. He's just concerned about my intent. And if my intent is to honor Him, He'll be good with that. But God's not honored unless we obey Him. They thought they could impress God just like Cain thought he could bring whatever offering to God he wanted to bring. And so he brought what? The things that he had grown. The things that he thought, this is what I've done, God, you ought to be impressed with this. This is my very best efforts I'm giving to you, Lord, and you ought to be so impressed with what I've just done. And that's kind of what they're doing here. They're doing a lot of very impressive things. They're just not being obedient. And as a result, their efforts, their very best efforts, caused the death of Uzzah. Your very best is always going to fall short. What we do is give God obedience. Honest obedience. Uzzah, they're going along, they got the ark on the cart, and it's uneven ground, and it starts, they hit a pothole or uneven ground, and he does what comes natural. When it looks like the ark may slip off the cart, he sticks his hand out to keep it from falling. That's more good intentions. Ooh, we can't let this touch the ground. It leads to his death. Because if you go back and you study Scripture, and what you'll see in Numbers chapter 4, Deuteronomy chapter 10, God gave very specific instructions concerning the ark. And in those instructions, only the Levites, and more specifically the Kohathites, as who were a sub-tribe in the tribe of the Levites, could carry the ark. And there was a very specific way. The ark was built to very specific design and specifications by God, and it had these rings on the side. And they stuck these poles through the rings, one on each side. And when it came time to carry it, they had 4 men, and they would rest the pole on their shoulders, and 2 in the front, 2 in the back. And that's the way they're supposed to carry it. And you know why they're supposed to carry it that way? Because in Numbers chapter 4, it says, if you touch any of the holy things, which the ark would be the holy thing that belongs in the Holy of Holies, the place of God, it says, you will surely die. So God gave them a design so that they wouldn't have to touch it. That they could carry it and honor God in the way that they carried it and being obedient to Him. See, David put a lot of planning into something that was meant to honor God, but really, in essence, it was honoring Him. It was honoring His plan. Because if he was truly trying to honor God, he would have gone back and looked to the law to understand how it was that they were supposed to carry it. If we don't seek God in the things that we do in the name of God, in our worship for Him, then what happens is our worship becomes self-centered. And it's not based on the fear of God. It's based on what we ourselves can accomplish. And our whole life is supposed to be a worship to God. So we plan out our lives instead of seeking God and what He wants for our lives. And in the life that we live, oftentimes it's more about our plan, our program, our talent, our abilities, what we want out of life instead of what God wants for us. And God always wants His best for us. And His best is always better than what we want. And it's also always, not always, but mostly in conflict with what we want. Even if you are here today, and those of you who are here today, and you know that you honestly try to seek God in all things, you know that oftentimes you find yourself with God's plans for you and your plans for you being in conflict. It just happens. Good intentions is not the same thing as fear of God. And then we see a life without the fear of God ends up driving you away from God. A life without the fear of God ends up driving you away from God. He goes on to say in verse 8, David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. And that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. And David was afraid of the Lord that day. And he said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? So David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David. But David took it aside to the house of Obed the Gittite. I got to tell you, David's selfishness is on full display here. You know, you read this story, and at first it's like, oh wow, what did God just do? He just struck Uzzah dead? And so we see, made David angry. And if you don't understand all that God is doing here and all that God has said, it is like, well, yeah, what's God thinking? I mean, didn't this guy just do what would come natural? Yeah, disobedience, I guess, does come natural for us. Especially when we're already pursuing our own life and our own plan, our own desires. So he's angry. And then, what does he say? It says he's afraid of the Lord, so there's this fear. But what does he say? How can the ark of the Lord come to me? It was all about David. How can I get what I want? How can I get what I want out of God? How dare God interfere with my plans when I was just trying to make Him look good? So you know what? I give up. I'm not willing to bring the ark into the city of David. Which I find interesting that we talked about it this morning in our life group about Ahaz when Isaiah prophesied to him and used that term city of David in a negative way and a rebuke towards him. But look at the way David's using it here. There again, it's this selfishness. It isn't this city which God gave him. This is my city. This is my city. I'm not bringing the ark into my city. Not after all this. Anger, resentment, trying to control the situation, responding to fear in the flesh. You know, when God doesn't respond to our good intentions, we take that fear and it can drive us away from God. Because God didn't respond the way we wanted him to respond. That can happen when we pray. When God doesn't answer a prayer the way we think he ought to answer. And it's like, okay, God, I prayed. Why aren't you giving me what I want? I prayed. I did what you asked me to do. You told me to bring all of my concerns, every problem in my life to you. And here I have brought it to you. And I still have the problem. I still don't have the result that I'm looking for. I don't want you, God. I don't want you. You can't be a part of my city. You can't be part of my life. And sometimes it's not just our prayers, it's even in our efforts and our worship, and we do things and we get excited and as a follower of Christ when you're serving the Lord. And sometimes we have these expectations that when I do this for God, God is going to do this because it brings him the most glory. Have you ever been guilty of thinking this is what's going to happen? That if we have a special service, oh man, this is what's going to happen. We're going to put in all this work and all this effort, and God is going to bless. Well, God will bless. But we don't know the mind of God. You know, to have this idea, I gotta tell you, I struggled with this early. And you know my story, some of you know my story, and where I was and far away from God, and God transformed my life. And I was asked to give a testimony to some middle school kids and all these things, and I didn't want to. It's like, oh no, I can't do that. And they kept coming back, no, you need to give a testimony. You need to give a testimony. And I no, I'm not ready to do that. And finally, after several months had gone by, I was like, okay. And I prayed. And I prayed. And I prayed. And I poured over all these things. And then I stood before those kids, and there was probably about 70 or 80 middle school kids. And I proceeded to tell them how I had overcome all the difficulties in my life and all the struggles in my life. And oh yeah, God is the one who gave me a hand up so that I could overcome all the difficulties of my life. And I was so impressed with my story. Because man, God's going to use this. I was like, okay, we want to close in prayer, and I want to pray for you. And I'm fully expecting God to just move. And when I asked for a response, I was what? And I'm like, no. Now I'm begging. You don't be afraid. Just put your hand up. I won't embarrass you. You got to do this. You got to respond to God. What I was really meaning was you got to respond to my story. You got to respond to me. And nothing. I got to tell you, I went home that day. And I ate lunch, and then I got up, and we lived across the street from high school. And I walked over, started just walking around the campus, the large campus, sitting on one of the outdoor stools that they had. And I was angry. Because I tried to honor God and he didn't keep up his end of the bargain. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I came back home and I'm still wrestling with this. The youth pastor wants me now to speak to the high school kids. I gotta tell you, I don't think I want to. You know why? I can't take my story being rejected again. But I agreed to it. But this time, still wasn't trying to honor God. But I wasn't trying to honor myself. It was just like, okay, here's my story. Can I go home now? It took me a long time to get over that. Because God didn't do what I wanted him to do. It was a long time before I ever shared my story again. I can tell you, and I'm not saying that this is the absolute truth of it, but the first time I remember sharing it was about 5 years later. And it was just to an individual because I felt like they needed to know the truth of my background. They were considering me for my first job in ministry. And I felt like I owed it to them to let them know my background, the struggles that I had had, but that what God did in my life was real. And I said very little about myself, and I said a lot about God. And sometimes we want God to do what we want God to do. We want him to honor our efforts. And when that doesn't happen, we become angry, confused, and afraid. Some people end up running from God. And they end up living a life with fear. But David is a man who chases after God's own heart. You see, if you read the rest of the account in 2 Samuel, you'll see that almost immediately afterwards, David does bring the ark. But the account in 2 Samuel is brief. If you look over to 1 Chronicles chapter 15, it is the parallel account of this. And it gives us a little more detail. It's 3 months later. And here's what a life with a healthy fear of God looks like. A life with the proper fear of God will lead to extreme obedience, which is worship. In 1 Chronicles 15, verse 1, it says, David built houses for himself in the city of David, and he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent for it, which is the tabernacle. That's what the tabernacle was. It was a tent that was designed according to God's specifications. And there was the inner part of the tent, and the back part of the tent, and there was a big veil that went across it. And behind that veil was the Holy of Holies, who only the high priest was to enter into, and that was the location for the ark. He's trying to bring it back before. He didn't even have a place for it. Oh, we just got to get the ark. We just got to get the ark. But now he's saying, we've got to prepare this place for the ark of God. And then David said that no one but the Levites may carry the ark of God. For the Lord has chosen them to carry the ark of the Lord and to minister to him forever. And David assembled all Israel at Jerusalem to bring up the ark of the Lord to his place, which he had prepared for him. He's going to extreme efforts here. He's prepared this place and he got the right people. He didn't just get good people. He's like, wait a minute. In other words, he doesn't tell us this, but where did David get all this information? He went back and he studied the law of God that tells him this is how you're supposed to do it. And he's not just doing what he wants to do and saying, God ought to be pleased with what I want to do. He has a real fear of the Lord, and it is worship. Because this is what God wants you to do. He goes on to say in verse 13, he says, because you did not carry it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us, because we did not seek him according to the rule. So the priests and the Levites consecrated themselves to bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel. And the Levites carried the ark of God on their shoulders with the poles, as Moses had commanded according to the word of the Lord. Yes! This is the way it should have been done from the very beginning. David recognized that he'd been living his life without the proper fear of God. That we didn't seek him according to his rules. We were living life. We felt justified in the things that we were doing. It was good stuff. It's good stuff. But it wasn't what God was bidding us to do. It was about honoring ourselves instead of honoring God. God isn't who we want him to be. He is God. And he's sovereign. And my life is not my own. I've been bought with a price. And if you've placed your faith in Jesus Christ, you too have been bought with a price. We belong to him. And there's no better place that we can be than at the center of his will. No safer place that we can be than at the center of his will. Not just doing good things, but doing the things in obedience to him that bring glory to him, because it's the way he has asked us to do them. David reads from the law. This is how you're supposed to do it. And he trusted that. 3 months earlier, he was mad. He was angry. And then he reads and he says, oh, wait a minute. I didn't honor God. I got to tell you, I looked at it and it's like, this was my thought when I read this. How would you like to be one of the Levites? Hey, you're a Levite? I need you to carry the ark. You mean the deal that Uzzah touched and died? Yeah, that. What day were you? I think I have a dentist appointment that day. I think my brother. Yeah, I got a brother, and I think he's available. Why don't you call him? I got to tell you, I think there would be some fear in the Levites. I'm just thinking, humanly speaking, we don't have their story, but I think humanly speaking, there's got to be this part that says, whoa, I don't want to do that. Fear. But instead of responding to that fear in the flesh, they responded to that fear, okay, but if we do it the way God told us to do it, we will be okay. We'll just obey. There's some trembling. But they gained wisdom, understanding of God's love for them, that God did want to be in their presence. God did have a plan and a purpose, not just for David, but for all of Israel. And the reality is, God has a plan and a purpose for you in your life. And it'll only be achieved through a proper fear of the Lord that causes you to trust him even though it scares you. But you gain this wisdom that you can trust him because of his great love for you. And in that, you worship. You sing praises to God. And that's what they did, is they continued to sing praises, but this time it's different because they're praises that they're singing, they're dancing before the Lord, is being done in obedience. They're living life according to the way God wants them to live life. Not just for themselves. God was not against David. But there for a moment, David had stopped chasing after him. But in God's mercy and grace, David was able to see that fear that he had in his own life, see that turned from a wrong fear to a proper fear. To a proper fear of the Lord. And a life with a fear of God is strengthened by God. A life with a fear of God is strengthened by God. In verse 26 of 1 Chronicles it says, because God helped the Levites who were carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. They sacrificed 7 bulls and 7 lambs. And you go back to the account in Samuel, what did they do? They would walk a few paces and they would stop and they would sacrifice a bull. And they would sacrifice a lamb. And they would pick up the ark again and they would go along and they would stop and they would do another sacrifice. And they would pick up and they would walk and they would stop. And 7 times they did this. And it probably started getting heavy. And it probably started getting old to them. But it was the strength of God. And let me tell you, when you think you can't obey God, when you think that what God is asking of you is too big, He is the one who says, you can trust me. Allow this fear that you have to trust me. Respond in faith, and you will gain from this because I am going to give you strength. Here's what fear does. I got to control the situation. And if I got to control the situation, I have to rely on my own strength. I have to rely on my own strength. I have to rely on my own wisdom. Proper fear of the Lord doesn't rely on self. It relies on God. You find that from chasing after God. And you can trust Him. And He'll give you strength to live this life. Let's stand with our heads bowed and our eyes closed. You know, at some point in life,